Welcome to the Sedona Soul Sisters Show, down-to-earth discussions on spirituality, metaphysics, paranormal, and healing topics. The Sedona Soul Sisters are the most trusted psychic mediums in Sedona, Arizona. We are Rosalind Reynolds, who's going to be coming back in, myself, Ivory Lanou, Terry Ann Russell, and Robert Markham. Robert's first show with us. Welcome. We
Thank
have
you.
offices in Sedona, Arizona, where we see clients from all over the world. Today's topic is synchronicity. If you're with us live and you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand or use the raise your hand feature in reactions. You can ask it in the chat room, which is open to the right. And if you're watching and listening later, we welcome your questions at any time. You can email us and we're happy to answer them. So I thought I would start by just explaining what does synchronicity mean? And it's just experiences that seem far too significant to be just day-to-day encounters. That's not coincidence. Some people will call those freak encounters or miracles, signs from the heavens. They can be guidance from your personal angels and guides, or even mystical instances of soul connection. They manifest in a variety of forms, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it is not, it's kind of like when you realize that there's a whole lot more out there that to just coincidence, and you start seeing the patterns. So, do either one of you want to say something about this?
Uh, I'd like to.
Great, go for it.
Yeah, I like how you were defining synchronicity, which seems like an appropriate thing to do as we begin the topic. And it seems like some the things that we see that they're meaningfully related.
Yeah,
Like we know that, but they lack a causal connection. And it's neat because I think the nature of the mind is we experience the world through cause and effect, and we navigate it that way. And what the mind does is it slices and dices things and says like, okay, here's the linear logical progression of how things work, and then we use that to make sense of the world, and we use that to navigate the world, and maybe achieve whatever we consider success to be through reliable, repeatable cause and effect relationships. It's like science.
it is.
However, I'm sorry, were you saying something?
Mm-mm.
Yeah. However, it's these moments where it's like we I'm going to my notes here. We can't explain it, and it's almost impossible. And it's like I think if we said like what is truth, and it's like truth is absolute context, infinite context. And what if in infinite context, like if we knew everything there is to know, synchronicities made perfect sense. So it's like to consciousness, to truth, to reality. Like synchronicities make perfect sense. There's no it's just like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. But to our mind, it's like impossible to describe. It's like how did this happen? And I bet each of us has some examples of synchronicities, which we'll probably share here. And thinking like it's almost like these instances transcend time. It's like how did this happen now? And you had to know this, and then whatever. But here's what boggles my mind, and I'll finish my statement here, is that what if the extent to which we understand synchronicities through trying to make a cause and effect relationship, what if that is indicative of how much we understand anything? Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, what if we look at synchronicities and we say like, oh my gosh, like I can't really put together how this happened. And it's like, what if that is actually life showing us this is how little this is how little you actually know. This is how limited your perception is about anything. And then it's like, well, what do we do with that? You know, which is something we could explore. Like, um, it's interesting. I think synchronicities, it's like little moments where life tells me like how little I actually know about what's going on. And I just wanted to spit that out. I appreciate you letting me.
And I think that's a very good point. I think the whole point is like, what does it mean? What does synchronicity mean when you're on a spiritual path? And they are incidents of spiritual significance. And for me, they have definitely aligned with my journey and with people who were important to me and other connections that got me to where I'm at now and keep me moving forward. They ask us to momentarily dampen our own self-obsession where we're just worried about ourselves, what's happening with us. Let me let Roz back in. And just consider the possibility of the divine, that there is something out there beyond what we are noticing as humans. There's something else out there. And these synchronistic experiences, they leave us with this curious sense of that we should pay attention. And to me, when people start noticing that, it tells me they're really ready to zoom forward with their spiritual journey. They're going to make a lot of progress. Welcome back, Roz.
Thanks.
That was an interesting little journey right there.
Suddenly we just lost whatever.
Yeah, it
Lost our
happens.
connection.
Sedona has terrible internet service, so let's just deal with that right now. It's a fact.
I just thought maybe they didn't want me to say anything about synchronicity.
Oh, did you have something big to talk about with that?
No.
They just think you do.
She's not going to share it now.
She's afraid she'll be knocked off the air again. So
Thank
once...
goodness for those little smartphones.
Oh, I know. Yes. Yes, that's what Robert ended up doing too. Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, yeah. What you just said made me think right before Roz joined. Roz, I think what Ivory was saying is how these synchronicities are significant on a spiritual journey. And that made me think, okay, there's what do humans like to do? We find meaning, we discern meaning, perhaps the highest meaning is what people like us look for. But I don't want to speak for everybody, but there's, okay, what does the synchronicity mean that's happening? And then what does it mean that synchronicities are happening? Like those two different things. It's like, okay, what does it mean? Because for me, I had way more synchronicities start happening the more what I felt was kind of elevation in consciousness, like focusing on greater frequencies, trying to be more loving and forgiving all the time, things like that. It's like, or when I feel, it's almost like synchronicities are happening when I'm like in the groove, I'm on the path. And you almost start noticing them. I started noticing them. What's that?
I totally agree.
Yeah, it's like, what is it? And it's something where, for me, I resigned to not trying to explain or describe it. I almost like smile at it. It's like a butterfly flying in front of you. What do you do with the butterfly flying in front of you? You appreciate it, right? Like it's just like, I notice it. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And I like to think also that maybe it's a measure of my perception becoming more pure. Like I'm able to notice things and see connections, see synchronicity that weren't available to me before. And so I do think that spiritual growth and spiritual awareness, higher spiritual attainment, is experiencing life through a greater context. And if you see life through a greater context, you have access to greater understanding of what it means. If we see an event happen and we only know a few pieces of information about it compared to a lot of information about it, then there's a little context versus a bigger context. And I'm kind of wandering now, but I just want to throw that out there, like what any of that means to you, that like, what do synchronicities mean? Like trying to unravel that. Should we try to do that? And then what does it mean that I am seeing synchronicities now? And what if like one week I see a bunch of them and then I go weeks without seeing them? It's I don't know if there's anything to do with that right there, but thought I'd say it.
No, I'm glad you did. And, I want to talk about something. What you were saying, Robert, really brought to mind something that happened for my daughter, Michelle, recently, and we've been talking about it a lot. She had the house that her and her family lived in the Chicago area, had a lot of really dark energy. And I was pushed down the stairs 3 times, injured. She got pushed down the stairs and nearly killed. It was just bad. And Roz saw this thing in their house. And she found out after they moved out that a young boy had hung himself in the basement. But what she found out later, she just got this idea, and this isn't the first time that something interesting like this has happened to her. regarding Native Americans. And she is, her father was half Native American. So she's got some of that blood. And I don't know if that's why, but she suddenly thought, I wonder if there was a strong, like a big Indian settlement in this area. And that's why there's so many problems in that specific part of this town. And she looked into it. She went to this little museum that interestingly I popped into over Halloween. I went in and looked through, and there was some things in there about it. And they were talking about how that little town on the west side of Chicago, in the suburbs, was a huge Indian settlement, and there were massacres in that area. And it ended up like the neighborhood she did live in, like that was where some of the worst atrocities happened. No wonder things were going on. And then that led her to, she and her sons were looking out at, they're always rock collecting, and she found this bone. She didn't realize it was a bone. And it ended up being this ancient, very old bear bone. And that sent her to a place to find out where it was. And then they sent her to a place called Starved Rock. And Starved Rock, she found out, was this terrible massacre where they sent Indians up on this rock and left them there to starve, like trapped them there till they starved. So it's still unfolding, like one thing after another, sending her to, now that she wants to know what happened in that area. I'm feeling angels come in as I'm talking about this, but it kept sending her to the next thing and the next thing that's putting this puzzle together. And it's not nearly finished, but it's like once she wondered about it, all of these things just started happening. And I think that's a great example of synchronicity, that, you know, it really fits along with what you are seeking.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that just gets my gears turning, thinking now, looking at other synchronicities. And I was just like, okay, what were the intentions I was holding in mind around that time? What were the desires? And maybe asking those questions is what will yield like more context, more understanding of what is this happening, you know? Interesting.
I think so too. I know one thing that pops into my mind too, and Roz and I have talked about this, like before I even moved to Sedona, and I already lived in the general area, but I moved to Sedona. Before I moved here, while I was looking for a place to move to live, I kept being drawn to the plaza, this Plaza West, where our office is now. And I kept being drawn to this specific suite. It said it was for rent. And every time I'd come to town, I'd go and I'd look in the windows. I never set up an appointment to go see in it, but I just knew I was going to have a business there. And it's like so weird. It's a professional plaza. There was nothing in that area regarding metaphysics or spirituality, nothing. It was all doctors, dentists, other professionals. But sure enough, you know, I moved to Sedona and I worked at a center, and Roz and I worked there together, and we decided we're going to start a business. And where did we end up? In that exact suite. In that suite. And now we moved to a different one in the plaza because we just needed a better setup for ourselves. But I think that was just really interesting that I was guided to that plaza when I didn't even have a business, let alone need a place to rent. And so when the time came, I thought of that suite, and I'd still been popping by there now and then, and it was still available, like it was held for us. It was just really interesting.
I love that. That's sort of how I found you guys. The first message I got was 6781 and go. And I was like, well, what the hell does that mean, right? And so I think a couple months went by when I was meditating on Airport Mesa, and I heard go see Roz at Sedona Soul Sisters. And I was like, okay, so I did. That's how we all came about, right? And then months later, I think that spot where we come into our office was closed, and I had to go down further and go around the back. And I go down further, and there's a mile marker, and it says 6781. And I'm like, holy shit, like, oh my gosh, like, you know, it's like it came beforehand, but what does that mean? It's like, you know, all these things happen. I'm sort of like Robert. I'm like, do you know how many things have to happen in order for it to all line up and to come in? Like, what has to happen at this time? And I have to see it. And then this person has to see it. So all these things have to line up for you. And I tell my clients too, sometimes it doesn't make any sense. You may get something and it's you're not ready for it yet, or it's not time for it to come in. But then when it is, you're not going to miss it. I always tell you, you're not going to miss it. Just pay attention and you will not miss it.
And there's a backstory to that, because Roz and I, we were looking for somebody to rent the third office at our business. And we're talking and we're like, I said, I just can't think of anybody. I just don't want to rent to somebody else. And Roz says, well, you know, I would rent to Terry Ann. And she was telling me about you, Terry Ann. And I'm like, well, that sounds good. It sounds like she'd be a good fit. And Ross says, but she's not looking for a place to rent. Oh, well, 3 days later, Terry Ann calls Roz. I mean, that's just how crazy this was. Like, we set an intention. Terry Ann's looking for something. Terry Ann hears that message. She sent to us, and we're like, it's the only person we could think of that we would rent to at that time. And she has been a perfect fit, as expected. So, you know, thank you, angels. Thank you very much.
I love that angelic organization.
Yes. Robert, do you want to say something?
Yes, there's a book that I've been working through called A Course in Miracles. I imagine most people in this town are familiar with that book. And for anybody listening that's not familiar with that book, it's real briefly, in a couple sentences, it's an accomplished psychiatrist in a very academic setting who all of a sudden started hearing this voice in her head. And I think it started out with, this will be a course in miracles. Please take notes. And she just started writing it down. And it's pretty commonly believed that it was Jesus she was channeling. And it's quite remarkable what's written in this, like 1,000-page book. Anyways, there's a part in the book, you know, he's talking about miracles and what a miracle is. And that's a conversation for another podcast, maybe another episode. But one thing he says is the miracle transcends time and space. It's not beholden to time and space. I think this is neat because I started talking earlier in the show about how the mind it's trying to navigate this reality using cause and effect, linear relationships. But reality, infinite context truth, is non-linear. It can be modeled, but all models are wrong. Some are useful. All egos are wrong, but they're useful. They help us survive. And it's neat when thinking, you know, it's just like these instances you're talking about and synchronicities I've had, it's kind of a miracle. Like it's beyond, it's not beholden to time and space. You like, I start trying to calculate it and I'm like, it's just not possible. And it's funny because it illustrates how incapable of perceiving reality with a capital R, like the mind is. And it's like accepting the limitations of the mind. And it's like, it says, okay, you know, maybe to get what I really, really want, there is some measure of setting intention and surrendering. And it's like the mind is useful, but the next step here is, I think, like discerning, okay, when do I use the mind? When do I use cause and effect? When do I use logic? And when do I just set the intention and say, please let my best and highest good attract what is in my best and highest good, et cetera, et cetera. And so merging those two things, I think, is interesting. And I'm not sure how that ties synchronicity together, but my point is that the neat thing for me about synchronicities is they're miracles in that they seem to transcend time and space. And the mind only experiences life in time and space. It needs that to make sense of things, to make sense of change. And anyways, that was my thought.
And as we know, time is a man-made construct. So there we are trying to use man-made constructs to make sense of what are clearly little miracles.
Right.
You know, not all miracles are gigantic. You know, I think little miracles surround us regularly, and we need to recognize that.
I think they happen every day.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like always noticing little things going on and thinking, here we go. Something's up.
Absolutely. Any other examples of synchronicity in your lives you want to share?
I have one I'll share. This wasn't long ago. I was watching I think most of the synchronicities I've forgotten about. I'd have to really think on it, but this one stands out because it was like a double whammy. It was like a double synchronicity. I was watching a podcast episode on YouTube from somebody that is a comedian, and it was real funny. And he brings up this guy. It was a triple synchronicity, actually. He brings up this guy's actor named Jeremy Renner. Maybe some people are familiar with him, and he brings up this guy, and like he uses some effects to show the guy's face going across the screen, and it was just a very Jeremy Renner themed moment on this guy's podcast. And just before I watched that video, I watched a video about Jeremy Renner, and it was just like, what are the odds that this actor, and it was just a lot of Jeremy Renner in my life for like 5 minutes. It was really strange. And then I was like, okay, that's interesting. And I just thought it was neat. And then 5 minutes later, he talks about little girls' names, or excuse me, women's names that are maybe unconventional, but they're very cute. And one he touched on was Piper. And then I said, oh, you know, it's interesting. A woman that I had some intimacy with in the past. She was a single mother, and one of her daughter's name was Piper. And this person was a very big influence in my life in this year, 2021. It was just interesting. I was like, okay, you know, that's kind of coincidental. And then the next thing that happens is, like, within like 30 seconds or a minute, like very quickly, he brings up this movie called Death Becomes Her. Meryl Streep was in it, Goldie Hawn. And the same woman, that's daughter's name is Piper, that was her like favorite movie to watch. This woman passed away this year, and in her final days, that was her favorite movie to watch. I mean, she watched it like 6 times. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like, how is this? It was just so coincidental. And then I just sat there and I was laughing. And it was one of those moments where I felt like life was telling me, like, man, you are so not in control. Like, it was like if life had a voice, it's telling me, I can make this thing anything I want or you want. And, you know, I'm sitting there thinking, man, how do I crack the code of having these synchronicities, quote unquote, work in my favor, right? To my best and highest good. And I'm like, wow. I mean, is my reality really this malleable? I mean, it's crazy. And that's one big example I want to share.
I think that's a beautiful one. Thank you for sharing that. And that's important because that's one way that these synchronicities come to us is through deceased people that we knew. They will get messages through to us in any way that they can. And I'm sure that I can feel a spirit entering as you're talking about that, Robert. So I'm sure that she was just kind of saying, hey, I'm fine. I'm on the other side. I'm still me. I'm thinking of you. And I want to talk about real quick, not so quick, some of the main ways that people experience synchronicity. And it can be overhearing a couple of people talking about something of great significance in your life. It really this list has a lot of overlap with the ways angels communicate with you, by the way. Watching episodes of a TV show that somehow have all the same storyline, focus, message. So you keep picking random shows and that same storyline or focus or message is coming through for you. That's not a coincidence. Getting the exact message you need at the exact right time, especially when you're going through tough times. I'll tell you what I got. I don't know if it's synchronistic, but it was from my master guide. I was going through this horrible relationship, and it really was in the end of it, and I was just a mess, as Roz can attest to. And I was in the shower just sobbing. I was just wrecked. And all of a sudden I started singing, I'm the man who loves you inside and out. Like, it just burst out of me. And I'm like, what the world? Bee Gees at this moment? You know, what the heck? And then I'm like, I felt the energy of my master guide come around me so powerfully. And I'm like, that's just a message from him at the time I needed to hear it the most. And I started laughing, and it really did help me start kind of turning a corner a bit, getting my feet under me, getting my strength again. Meeting the exact right person at the exact right time, like Terry Ann coming to us at the time that we really needed a third partner at that time. Seeing the same symbols or images repeated everywhere. magazines, license plates, billboards, newspapers, cards, glancing at the clock at the exact same time. I have that happen a lot. Most people on spiritual journeys do, where for a while you might keep looking at the clock and it's 2:13, waking up at 2:13, or, you know, especially the number one is like seeing that 11:11 or 1:11. Reoccurring signs that seem to lead you somewhere special, like they're leading you to your ideal job or a great home or a partnership, a relationship of some kind. Hearing the same song repeated many times, especially if it's a song you haven't thought about in a long time or haven't heard in a long time, and then all of a sudden you hear it repeatedly. I have that a lot, and I don't know if it's because I'm a singer. I don't know. Strange alignments of birth dates between friends, partners, colleagues, like, and I do have this a lot. Find out multiple people I know have my birthday that are good friends. It's very interesting. Seeing repeated numbers, thinking about something and mysteriously having it happen. Boy, we had that happen a lot at Sedona Soul Sisters. Being at the right place at the right time. I do think having yourself aligned for opportunities is a big part of synchronicity. Dreaming about people, animals, places, and then seeing them repeatedly in real life. And seeing repeated symbols, like something that means something to you, like the infinity sign, the triangle, the tree of life, all these symbols. We've done shows about those various symbols. So those are some different ways that this can come into play in your life. So there's just this huge variety of ways you can experience it.
Well, I think too, you know, just sort of taking that a step further, like, you know, how the three of us will sit down together and just discuss goals, intentions, etc., when we know that something needs to suddenly bust loose. And while we're concentrating on that, we can feel that energy align. You can feel everything starting to come together to bring the synchronicities, to align everything. And I always think of that, like, it sounds so strange, but I think of it like when I'm at an airport and you look out and there's all these planes that are lined up, that are coming in at this, you know, one right after the other. That's the way I always think of bringing forth, you know, our intentions. And I visualize it like that, and I'm calling it in, you know. So I think there's a lot of power in our thoughts. Of course, our thoughts and words have tremendous power, but our thoughts of synchronicity can definitely add to that energy and bring it forth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Robert, you want to add something?
Yeah, Roz, you pinged something in my mind when you said alignment, and I thought of karma. And I was like, ooh, how does karma synchronize with synchronicity here? And the things that came to mind there is that sometimes I feel like I'm almost in a, like I can sense more and more, I think, and, you know, inching up in spiritual awareness and spiritual maturity, like I can recognize karmic opportunity a little bit better. It's very difficult, you know, transcending the ego to do that, but, you know, working from the heart, maybe we can. And if we can do the best we can in those karmic opportunities, perhaps we'll have less suffering and won't have to play out that karmic opportunity again. I don't know. That's just a theory. But I think, like, man, it's like, okay, how do I know, how can I be sure that I'm doing the right thing when I have a karmic opportunity, right? Like, how do I know I'm in alignment, right, or whatnot? And then I think, like, well, you know, the more I feel like I'm in alignment and I am maybe experiencing these karmic opportunities in the most loving way, perhaps in the highest sense, and I'm less repeating a desire I need to play out or something like that. I don't know. Again, topic for another podcast. But I feel like the synchronicities sort of increase when I want to, and they're like telling me I'm going in the right way. actually. And it's sort of, that's when I was like, okay, maybe these synchronicities are indicating that I'm doing something right. There's another dimension to the synchronicities. Like you mentioned the songs coming to you and whatnot. I was like, oh man, like, yeah, like what energy is potentiating that in me? Why did I just sing Conway Twitty, it's been a long time, you know, to try to impersonate Ivory there. Good to see you. You know, I was like, why, what the heck, where did that come from? And, you know, I think most individuals would say, you know, it's just the brain doing brain stuff, and you got memories and things like that. And I was like, you know what, there's some funky energetic things going on. And maybe thinking that there's a message here, and like delving deeper and letting go and thinking like, okay, like, what is this saying to me? Why am I singing this? What does this mean? Because to wrap this up, you know, I can go back and look at songs I saved from a particular month on my Spotify or something. And I'm like, whoa, these were all lining up with what I was feeling at the time, what I was going through. It's easy, hindsight 2020. I was like, oh, that's why I was listening to that. But at the time, I was just unaware of it because I'm trying to navigate life. And so maybe these synchronicities are telling us not only messages about what we're feeling or what we need to hear or something, but what if they're also indications that we're on the path, that there is alignment occurring, and there's some sort of a karmic thing going on. You know, how does karma play into this? And that's all I wanted to say.
You know, in line with what you're saying, Robert, like another song that was going through my head, there were two, and I can't remember what the other one was, but it was the same theme. This was recently, like for 2 weeks, I constantly found myself singing out loud. One of them was, "It's the end of the world as we know it." That's not a song I'm particularly fond of or thinking about. And there was another one that had the same message about the end of the world, and it was really disturbing to me. But I really think it is about just my own anxieties, probably echoing my anxieties about things happening in the world right now that are very disturbing to me. But I don't like it sometimes when these songs come through. But I want to say something about what you were talking about, Roz, about how we kind of mind meld at Sedona Soul Sisters. And a concrete way that I can think of that is so many times I'll walk into Roz's office and I'll say something like, "It occurred to me that we should do this." And she's like, "I just had that same idea like last night. I was just thinking about it." Or vice versa. She comes in, or I'll come in and she'll be like, "Terry Ann and I were just talking about that yesterday." And so it's like everybody seems to get this idea, this thought, or this realization pretty much at the same time, which is a good mind meld to have. So that's a synchronicity I like very much.
Well, that's your connection too with people, right? We have all that strong connection, like you're saying about the birthdays. Roz, you know, shares a birthday with my mom. There's so many synchronicities. You know, if you go back and look at all of them, like even after my son passed away and he directed me to my publisher, like all of these things had to occur. And had I not listened to him, I was like, "Are you crazy? I can't write a book." You know, so all these things have to occur. And then you're sitting here, like Robert said, you're in that egoic mind. "I can't do this. Are you nuts?" And then he brings her into me. It's perfect. It's amazing. And I'm just like, wow, you know, how is this all possible? And so I think as it happens more and more to you, you start to see there's something else going on here, something that I don't have any control over, something that I really need to look at. What is it that I need to look at that they're showing me? And how do I go about getting out of, you know, letting my ego get out of the way so that I can do that and follow what I'm supposed to do? So many things have to happen. And I think when you're in touch with the people that are really in your tribe, you know, there's always these things that come up with us. And I know when we connect our energy, it's so powerful in that office. And I feel like there's this like light shining out the top of it.
I agree.
Agreed.
Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, when you mentioned egoic mindset again, like the word that comes to mind immediately is ignorance. And in my opinion, my interpretation of what masters like Jesus and Buddha and all the many sages we don't even know about teaches is salvation from ignorance, and because ignorance might lead to suffering. And it's like it's kind of what I was touched on earlier, that it's a reminder of how not in control you are, and the extent to which I understand how all this is happening is an indication of my ignorance. It's like, man, and it's surrendering to that, and surrendering to the following the energy, and getting out of the mind. Like, maybe this is a good argument for that synchronicity.
And I think that Terry Ann, something that you mentioned made me think of this, the fact that when we have these moments like this, I think that it is that we're so stuck in our heads. Robert, you mentioned this too, like we get really stuck in our heads, and I think synchronicity sometimes is to pull us out of our heads so that we're not wasting a lot of time wondering what people think about us or how we look or what, whether we're accomplishing as much as we should. That's all like self-created trauma we do to ourselves. But if you pull yourself out of that, you are starting to notice more happening around you. And that's one of the reasons that I always tell my students and clients, like, if you are feeling lost, you're feeling confused, the best thing you can do is go out and volunteer, because it gets you out. It starts thinking about other people. And Terry Ann, you said something else too. I'm going to lose track if I don't get back on this here. Is, what was it about your son? So a lot of this is hard to recognize because sometimes it's happening in times where we are in very serious trauma, and that's when we're most likely to pull into ourselves and be very self-involved. And I don't think it's really the ego as much as it is a self-protective shell that we kind of put around ourselves. But the harder life is, the harder it is to notice these things. So they're going to get more dramatic. So I kind of want to get into just one quick thing, is because somebody asked me recently, what's the difference between serendipity and synchronicity? Serendipity is a one-time event. Let's say you've been needing money for something and you put on a jacket and find $100 bill in the pocket. Great. It's exactly the amount you needed. That's serendipitous. But synchronicity is a string of events that all fit in together that take you somewhere specific, whether it's a realization or, like we said, finding something you've been looking for, not meaning like an item so much as a place for you in life, finding your tribe, finding the best job, finding a relationship, all of these pieces that fall into place. So that's the difference. And I think another one people ask about is what's the difference between coincidence and synchronicity? I'm going to tell you my thought on that is I think people call it coincidence when they're not awakened, when they don't realize synchronicity exists and they haven't yet tuned into that. Any other thoughts on that?
Or people will say, you're so
I don't
lucky. It just happened,
Yeah,
right? Just luck.
I just don't think there really are any coincidences. They're so rare.
Yeah.
Everything is flowing all the time. And if you connect the dots, all of a sudden answers start coming, situations start presenting themselves. It's not coincidental at all. I always feel like, my angels and guides are in charge and I'm just along on the boat ride.
Did you want to say something, Robert?
Yeah, you were making me think, Roz, about how maybe there's a level of consciousness where one is unconditionally loving, and it's very easy for them to forgive somebody because they have compassion for that person's ignorance, because they have compassion for their own ignorance. It becomes effortless to forgive. And then that person's having a pretty good life. You're that good at forgiving and good at surviving, have a pretty good life. But then, like, perhaps if you go up even higher, there's one's mantra is that there's nothing to forgive in the first place, because my perception is so imperfect, so limited and beholden to my memories and proclivities and likes and dislikes. It's just a model of reality I'm using to navigate. And theirs is too. And my reality is saying that their reality wronged my reality. And it's like, okay, my reality is not real. It's all happening in here. Their reality is not real. It's all happening in theirs. So it's like, it's two unreal things, wanting the other one to recognize its view. And I just lost track of how you ping that onto me, but it has something to do with love. Anyways, Ivory.
Well, I'm glad to hear all of this. I think it's been a really interesting discussion. And again, if you have questions you want to ask us, we're happy to address them later. The email for that is in the show description if you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast platforms, and you can always contact us directly. So you've been watching the Sedona Soul Sisters Show. If you'd like more information about us or our services, please visit our website, sedonasoulsisters.com. Subscribe to our channel on YouTube so you don't miss anything. And tune in next Friday. Robert, did you come up with a topic for next week? As the new guy, you were given that opportunity. If you don't, it's okay.
Well, what comes to mind, I want to look at it. Two things that just immediately come to mind, I'll just drop them here. One is the merits of having a more simple or a more complex life, as we're building our life, and ways in which that could affect our ability, like as complexity grows in the design of our life in whatever context, job, relationships, etc., how that enables or inhibits us from maybe staying true to spiritual principles.
Oh, Robert, I love it. Let's do that next week. So there you hear it straight from the mouth of the creator. We're going to be talking about whether it's good to have a simpler or more complex life when you're on a spiritual journey. And in the meantime, we hope that you have an enlightening week.